Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I'm a bit late on this since it's Friday as I'm uploading this video, but here's my review of Super Amazing Wagon Adventure to celebrate. This was released on Xbox 360 and PC, but what you're seeing here is the PC version, and it's coming to you courtesy of Lucar, who sent me this, so thank you for that. It is greatly appreciated. This is a rather odd 2D action game by Sparse Vector that was originally released for Xbox 360 in July of 2012 and later saw a release on PC in October of 2013. And it's basically just an action game parody of Oregon Trail. If you've never played any of those, you create your party of people going to Oregon and you load up your wagon with supplies and you adventure off into the west in order to eventually reach Oregon. This game only uses the broadest thematic elements of that. So basically, you're in a wagon, you got your party, and you're going off to the west. And that's pretty much where the similarities between this and Oregon Trail end, and where everything else begins. So let's just go ahead and start delving into this thing and finding out exactly what it is. Well, there's really not much to talk about in terms of the presentation because, I mean, just look at it. The only really interesting thing about the visuals is that it has an option to make the screen look like a CRT television. Other than that, you're dealing with an 8-bit art style that's meant to look kind of like an Atari game, but it doesn't quite get to that level. And even though it is bright and colorful, it's extremely pixelated and very undetailed, and on top of that, pretty much everybody is just kind of sick of the retro art style in indie games at this point, just because it comes across as really lazy. But given how silly this game is, it doesn't really matter all that much in the long run. Similarly, the sound design is meant to sound 8-bit. There is some voice acting in this thing, but it's very heavily digitized, and it sounds like a speaker from a really old device, like, say, an Atari, or perhaps a bit more accurately to what this is going for, an NES. Suffice to say, there's really not much to speak of there. It's a bunch of beeps, bloops, and snapping noises that sound like they're straight out of an Atari. Then, of course, there's the music, which is definitely catchy, but it gets very repetitive very quickly, because you're dealing with the same handful of songs over and over and over again, and they are very short loops. Ultimately, this all means that the presentation is just not remotely impressive, so that's a bit of a letdown there. But of course what really matters here is the gameplay, because there's basically no story to speak of other than you're a 3-person party with your wagon and you're going to cross the west. You start off with one wagon unlocked, and you can create your party of 3 or you can just kind of randomize it. It's up to you really. And then you can just go off on your adventure, and to do this you're going to be moving up, down, left, and right and pressing the button to shoot at things, because you're just driving along and shooting at basically anything that gets in your path. Along the way, you'll find health pickups that can restore hearts on your various characters, as well as weapons that you can use against the various animals and other things that you'll encounter throughout the game. And you'll also run into traders occasionally who will trade things to you for the furs that you collect by running over animals that you've killed. Sometimes that's really useful, sometimes it's not. It just depends on the luck of the draw, because most of this game is randomly generated. The basic structure is going to be the same. You're going to always start out in the forest and you're always going to have the same starting event, but from there things are going to change up quite a bit. And eventually you'll get to a next point, which is the plains, and then you move on to the next point, and so on and so forth. It's the journey along the way that's going to get different. You're going to get a lot more odd particulars. Things like you can run into an event where you go into a cave and suddenly you're fighting giant spiders, or you'll try jumping over a river. Yes, you can try to do that in this thing, and instead of jumping over the river you'll land into a nest of bees, or my personal favorite, you'll jump too high and end up in outer space. In case you can't tell, this thing is not remotely realistic, nor is it even sensible. It is completely ridiculous, it is over the top, and it is just plain silly. I mean, you can have a space shuttle for a wagon, or you can have a wagon that is not actually there, it's an invisible one, or any number of these other things that just make things ridiculous as you go through the course of the game. Now, depending on how you deal with the various events that you run into, and if you're successful with them, then you can unlock various wagons as well as various survival modes that you can mess around with. Survival mode is basically just exactly what it sounds. You just keep going until eventually you die. Meanwhile, the standard game mode is something that you can beat in roughly 10 to 15 minutes, and it's basically just going through a specific set of overarching ideas that have a bunch of wacky particulars in between. And the only real difference between various events is that sometimes you're running around outside of the wagon and sometimes you're in the wagon. If you're running around outside of the wagon, you have a crosshair that you can move around in order to shoot at things, and if you're in the wagon, then you're doing the movement and dodging things and that sort of thing. In the case of the wagon, it is basically just a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, and in the case of being outside the wagon, it's just a top-down shoot-'em-up. So you're dealing with a very simplistic game right from the get-go, and it's really just the sense of humor that's going to carry it for you. So really the enjoyment factor is going to come down to whether or not you find things like driving your wagon across the plains while mowing down buffalo with a rocket launcher funny, or suddenly running into ninjas in the middle of the Great Plains and all sorts of goofy things like that. If you find that sort of thing funny, then you'll definitely be able to enjoy Super Amazing Wagon Adventure, at least for a bit. But in terms of gameplay, it's extremely simplistic, and pretty much everything that you'll encounter in the game can be done in the span of about an hour. That's assuming you even make it far enough to get through the game. It is definitely not an easy game to get through, simply by nature of the enemies constantly swarming you and it being incredibly easy for all of your guys to die in a very short period of time. Sure, there is some replay value in the fact that you have to do various things to unlock all of the wagons and the survival modes that you can mess around with, but when you really get down to it, the game is so simplistic that it just relies almost exclusively on its humor. The other thing that will either make or break it for you is that, again, it's randomized, but it's also got some roguelike elements in that it has permadeath. So if your party dies, they're dead, and you have to start the whole game over again. Luckily, like I said, it's a pretty short game. You can beat the main story mode, so to speak, within the span of about 10 to 15 minutes. But that's also part of the problem. It is meant for very quick play sessions, and if you try to play it for more than maybe 30 minutes to an hour on end, then you're going to find that it's going to wear thin very, very quickly. What helps to mitigate that considerably is the price point. It is $3 on Steam. And it regularly goes on sale for about $1.50, so you're dealing with something that is definitely very simplistic, very short, and it has barely any replay value in it simply by nature of being kind of randomized, as well as the limited number of unlocks that actually sufficiently affect the game to really matter to you, but it's only $3. If they asked for more than that, then we would start to have an issue, but since it's only about $3, the price is right for something like this. This is really kind of a joke game that you'll get your friends because it's just silly and you just want to have some fun for maybe a few minutes. But if you really try to mess around with it and get considerable amounts of playtime out of it, you're probably going to be sorely disappointed with it. This is ultimately why I'm giving this a 3 out of 5 with that stipulation. For what it is, that price point really does save it, because this is just a joke game. You get it for your friends in order to have a laugh, and that is what it excels at. It is just silly, it's fun, it's nonsensical for at least a few minutes. And particularly if you get it on sale for about $1.50 or less, then there's really nothing lost there. The thing is, your mileage may vary, so if this looks like something that you would get some enjoyment out of because it's right in line with your sense of humor, then you may want to pick it up, but other than that, it's something you could fairly easily avoid, unless of course you just want to send your friend a game that's really silly and just have a laugh with them. Thanks for watching.